Hello, everybody. My name is Nathaniel Jordan, and I'm a senior at Waldorf University. This is my senior thesis presentation, and it's called Examining the Effects of Background Noise when Completing a Focus Task. All right, as you guys can see here, this is my hypothesis, and it reads, structured background music can enhance focus by overshadowing other unimportant stimuli, while unstructured free jazz music diminishes focus. Now, just to distinguish between what qualifies as structured music and unstructured music, for the purpose of this experiment, I defined it as structured music has a set tempo, clear and distinct melody, and balanced dynamics, while unstructured music would be the opposite of that, fluctuating tempo, improvised melodies, and harsh dynamics. So this is how we're going to distinguish between structured and unstructured music. So these are two key terms that I would like to identify before proceeding. The first is selective attention. This can be defined as when an individual tunes out certain stimuli in an environment while focusing on other stimuli. Now, selective attention is an automatic process. We're constantly doing it without realizing it. And the reason for this is in any environment, there is so much stimuli around us that it would be impossible for us to take it all in at once. Now consider the example of working in a library. Now, say you have to work on a certain task. I don't know, it could be writing a paper, drawing, painting, reading, any sort of task. Now, when you're working on this, there's constant stimuli around you. There could be coffee being made. You can smell the coffee. There could be the visual stimuli of the vending machines or books on the shelves. And there could be the auditory stimuli of the clock ticking. Now, we manage through selective attention to tune all these stimuli out in order to focus on our task to complete. Now, an auditory distraction can be defined as when a speech or non-speech sound irrelevant to the completion of a certain task diverts focus. So in a way, this is breaking from structure. Now, if we go back to the example I provided of working in a library, we managed to tune out certain stimuli like a clock ticking or visual stimuli or the smell of coffee being made. These are all things we are able to tune out. However, when there's a breaking from a structure or something that's unexpected, like let's say that somebody slams the door when leaving the library or somebody knocks over a few books. Now these are unexpected sounds, and by nature they would become an auditory distraction and hinder us from completing any sort of task. There are three justifications for research I would like to identify. The first is it's very common to see people listening to music when they're completing a task. This is something I saw when I was working at the Waldorf Library. It would be very usual to see people coming in listening to music while writing a paper, and sometimes they'd be listening to the music quite loudly. And I think if we understand how music impacts task completion, we'll know whether it's better to listen to music or to not listen to music. The second reason why there's justification for research is that there's the potential to enhance productivity. Now, if my hypothesis is true that structured music can enhance productivity, obviously this would be a great tool for task completion. The third justification for research is to identify effective study environments. If we have an idea of what auditory stimuli enhances focus, we can know where to complete various tasks. Methods overview. Regarding participants, I was hoping to recruit about 40 undergraduate students aged 18 to 24. These students would be recruited by visiting classrooms. I would simply bring a sign-up sheet for 2 different nights with the goal of getting 20 students on each night. Students could only participate if they had no auditory issues. So, some measures include a consent form, which is obviously used in any experiment, and some demographic papers, just some basic information like, are you a freshman, sophomore, etc., how old are you, what's your major, just some demographic information like that that students would be asked to fill out. For the focus task, it would be rocket math problems. Now, some of you may remember working on rocket math problems in elementary school. Essentially, it's a set of 40 mathematical problems that you're encouraged to complete as fast as possible. So I would use these rocket math sheets for measurement, and they would just consist of basic multiplication and division problems, so nothing too complicated. For the structured music, I would do Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart Symphony Number 40 in G minor, and that would be the structured song. The unstructured song would be a free jazz song by Ornette Coleman called WRU. There would also be a third group of auditory stimuli that would just play no music. As I stated earlier, there would be two different groups in this experiment with about 20 participants each. It would be a within subjects design, meaning that both groups would be exposed to all three auditory conditions, which again are free jazz music, which is unstructured, Mozart music, which is structured, and no music at all. These would be the three auditory conditions. After signing the consent form and filling out the demographic sheet, the experiment would begin. Participants would be handed out their first rocket math sheets, which would be flipped over so they couldn't look at it. Once everybody was ready, I would start the first auditory condition, which would be no music, and students would have 90 seconds to complete the rocket math sheets or fill out as many questions as possible. After 90 seconds passed, they'd be asked to flip the sheets back over, and I would collect them. They would receive a 60-second break and would receive their second rocket math sheet. After the 60 seconds were up, students could start filling out the second rocket math sheet for an additional 90 seconds. However, this time the Mozart music will be playing. After the 90 seconds were up, I would collect their second rocket math sheet and they'd receive another 1-minute break. Finally, this would be repeated once again, except with Ornette Coleman music, and students would have 90 seconds to complete a third and final rocket math sheet while the Ornette Coleman music was playing. After that, their sheets would be turned over and collected. Once the experiment was over, students would be debriefed on the purpose of this experiment. I would just basically explain, the purpose of this experiment is to examine how background music affects the completion of a focus task. After debriefing, students would be free to leave. There are two key variables in this experiment. The first would be the condition of music. There are 3 different conditions of music. The first would be no music. The second would be the Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart Symphony Number 40 in G minor, and the third condition would be the Ornette Coleman WRU song. So these would be the 3 conditions of music and would be the first variable of the experiment. The second variable would be rocket math worksheets, which, as I stated earlier, just consist of 40 basic multiplication and division problems, like 7 times 6 equals 42. And the mean score of these rocket math problems would be calculated based on the music that was playing while they were being completed. Hypothesized results. As you can see here on this table, when looking at the 3 different conditions, when participants heard classical music, they scored an average of 19.03 problems correct on the rocket math sheets, meaning that participants were most successful hearing the classical music. On the other end, we have free jazz music, where students were least successful, only answering an average of 12.47 rocket math problems. As you can see under the column regarding percentages of correct answers, the no music group answered about 38.5% of the rocket math problems correctly. The classical music answered 47.58% of the problems correctly, while the free jazz music group answered only 31.18% of the problems correctly. So these results are significant, and they show the differences between the ability to focus based on the music being played. So this graph just provides a visual idea of the difference between the 3 groups. You can see just how significant the differences would be. The no music group, scored in the middle, while the classical music scored the highest and free jazz scored the lowest. And when you look at this graph, you can see it is significant where classical music results tower over the free jazz music results. Conclusion and implications. I think that the results would be consistent with the hypothesis for a few reasons. It all comes down to the qualities of music that differ between the Mozart and the Ornette Coleman song. Structured music has a clear tempo, clear and distinct melody, and balanced dynamics, and I think all of this combined creates a certain elegance. It appeals to the ear, and it can create a rewarding experience when completing any sort of focus task because it can fire off dopamine in your brain and can be reinforcing in that way. Now, comparably, auditory, or my bad, unstructured music would be the exact opposite of this. There's unstructured, fluctuating tempo, improvised melodies, if there even is a melody at all, and harsh dynamics. And I think rather than creating a rewarding feeling, there's the potential for unstructured music to be particularly grating to the ear and will constantly throw you off task as an auditory distraction when you are working on any sort of task completion. Implications. Music during task completion can have positive or negative effect. Really, this experiment shows just how powerful music can be. It's not just something we hear, but it can affect our behavior. It affects how we feel. And I think for this reason, it can have both positive qualities and negative qualities, and it often comes down to the song. So for certain tasks, I really think music has the potential to enhance the completion. And I think this is certainly true for tasks that may be considered repetitive. Just to name a few examples, some tasks that someone might consider like everyday tasks that are like maybe mundane, folding laundry, washing dishes, shoveling snow, sorting through files, sweeping, or cooking. These are tasks that have to be complete, and they don't take a lot of cognitive effort. And I think for that reason, music could have a positive quality and enhance the completion of these tasks at a faster rate and increase focus as well. There are quite a few limits of this experiment, and I think the first limit regards the type of music. Now, when you think about structured and unstructured music, that's really a very broad way of classifying music, Like, for example, what if there was a structured non-lyrical pop song and a structured non-lyrical blues song? Both are structured, but would they have the same impact on task completion? I think another limit regarding the type of music is about lyrical music, Both of the songs in this experiment are non-lyrical. What if we took one song that had two different versions? One was lyrical and one was non-lyrical. Would the lyrical version create a distraction from task completion while the non-lyrical would enhance task completion? It's possible, but that's a limit of this experiment. A second limit is the nature of the task. While math problems does require some focus, it's only very basic math problems. Would music have the same effect if someone was completing much more complicated calculus problems? This still remains unknown. And going beyond math even, what if you had to work on something creative while listening to music? Does music increase creativity or does it hinder creativity? What would happen if you were listening to music while writing a short story, if you were painting, or any sort of task that requires creativity? It still remains unknown how music would impact that. The third limit to this experiment is characteristics of participants. Now, the ages of these participants, as I identified earlier, are relatively limited, just college students ranged approximately 18 to 24. Maybe for kids under the age of 13, they're impacted much differently by the sound of music, and maybe for them, it hinders focus. And maybe with elderly people, music really increases focus. Really, we don't know what the answer to this would be. Another limit regarding the characteristics of participants would be musical versus non-musical students. Let's say one student is a master at the clarinet, while the other has never touched an instrument in their life. Maybe for the student who plays the clarinet, music would be much more distracting since they have the ability to analyze the music, identify different qualities of it, and that ability splits their attention much more towards the music than the focus task when compared to the non-musical student. So these are all three key limits that really could be expanded upon and make a more concrete understanding on how music impacts focus. So here is my first page of references. I used 12 references in total just to research some background information about what to predict for this experiment. And this is my second page of references. So this concludes my presentation. Now, due to the nature of this project, I obviously cannot take any live questions. However, I invite you to leave a YouTube comment if there's anything I can answer. I hope you all are doing well, and I thank you for listening.